And I think that that does bring up a good question, Mr. Secretary, which is how we move forward to get a large portion of this paid for by Saudi Arabia, by Kuwait. I remember in 1990 when the invasion of Kuwait occurred, in order to push that army, which at the time was the 5th largest army in the world, the Iraqi army, in order to push it out of Kuwait, there was a coalition, and there were 116,000 airstrikes that decimated 42 divisions. Frankly, the tanks, 3,700 were destroyed. The armored vehicles were destroyed. We saw the value of air power in pushing back a force. And to date, I think we have less than 200 airstrikes. So that's one point I would bring up with you. Another point I would bring up just goes to the question of what we can do with respect to those passports you spoke of: French, Belgian, British, Australian. These are individuals who would be able to travel to the United States without a visa. I know that we have the authority here in the United States. The State Department can revoke a passport if someone's likely to cause serious damage to the national security of the United States. But we frankly need some kind of interagency process, I think, to identify Westerners that travel to fight alongside ISIL. And I wanted to speak to you about that issue as well. I've been working on legislation to address this. We should have a carve-out, of course, for Doctors Without Borders and the doctors group SAMS and other groups that are going to, try to help with respect to setting up hospitals and refugee camps. But in terms of those going to fight, I think we need a way to approach this to make certain that their ability to come back in the United States is made a hell of a lot more difficult than it is right now. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Secretary, about that.
Yes, sir. Chairman Royce, let me just say very quickly, it's just not the time to begin comparing the number of airstrikes, because the number of airstrikes that took place, obviously then, was related to an invasion, a full-scale invasion. This is not an invasion. This is a counterterrorism operation. And it's going to be different, number one. Number two, if we had engaged in just jumping in and leaping in and doing airstrikes one place or another without the structure or without the forethought or the proper targeting and so forth, and something went awry, we'd be up here and every single one of you would be looking at us and asking us why we, shot before we aimed and did our homework. So,
but Mr. Secretary, with all due respect on that point, our ability now with armed drones and with F-16s to be able to see a target from the air,
I agree.
We could actually see from the planes the fact that they were flying this black flag. They were in long columns. We didn't know what was happening here. They took Fallujah, they took Tikrit, they eventually took Mosul, and in every one of these situations, we had an opportunity to hit those columns from the air.
And I will tell you, I was chomping at the bit and agonizing over that, watching these convoys, and you'd see them on CNN, and you'd say, why aren't we doing this, that? But in point of fact, when we stopped and thought through the strategy, if we had begun to do that and did it in full swing, we might have actually interrupted, if not prevented, the capacity of the Iraqi government to have a new government, new formation. And there were serious considerations there about timing and process.
And I acknowledge that point, but at the same time, by the time this got to Mosul, and we're talking now about the central bank in Mosul, we had reached a point where the ability to take that city and take the cash out of the central bank would arm this terrorist organization to an extent that no terrorist organization previously had their hands on that much cash.
But that's why we're building the coalition, Chairman, because they got to buy those weapons from somewhere. That cash has got to go out to another country. It's got to go out through a system. Somehow those weapons have got to get in there. And if we do this effectively enough, and that's where all countries can play a role, shutting their borders, enforcing the law, engaging in intel cooperation, and preventing that money from being effective if you can't spend it effectively out of the country. Now, that's one. Two, with respect to passports, you're absolutely correct. I have the authority to revoke passports. And we are currently examining all of the people, the individuals. We're trying to learn as well as we can who is there and what those possibilities are. We also need to do that with sensitivity to certain investigations that may be going on, because you don't want to flag something. But we're well aware where that's part of the strategy and part of the process. And what I want to make certain is that anybody who has a passport who returns in handcuffs, not through customs with their passport. And that's our goal. And finally,
my time's expired, but finally, you can finish, Mr. Secretary.
No, that's fine. That's adequate.
My only point here was we have to step it up from the air. Let's go to Mr. Elliot Engel from New York.